All right. Hi, Michelle. Hi, Batzi. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining me here today
Hello.
on Vonvo.com. It is January 19th, and just before we get started, I wanted to go over two quick things. The first is that this conversation is being recorded right now, and after the recording is done, we're going to be posting this video to our YouTube channel. Is that okay with both of you?
Yeah, fine with me.
Michelle, is that okay?
Yeah, it's fine. Oh,
Michelle, do you hear me?
I can't hear you. Let me ask you something. Can this be done on an own?
Could you say that one more time? Michelle, do you hear me okay?
It's it's cutting up a little. I was asking, can you do this on an iPhone or on the computer?
Only on the computer right now. Hopefully in time we'll be able to develop a phone application. Okay. Do you hear me a little bit better now?
Okay.
I turned off my camera as well.
I heard you very well right now, and I heard Batzi too.
Okay, good.
and I can hear you both, so it's great.
Yes, I do.
All right, good.
No lagging or.
And just the other one
Yeah,
other.
actually, I hear.
Do you hear me okay?
Hello?
Batzi, do you want to click your turn off camera button also, and that'll make it less laggy?
Okay. I can hear you both well, so do you want me to still turn it off?
Yeah, because it's probably just even though it sounds fine for each of us, it might still come in at times. Do you want to do a test now?
Can you hear me better now? Yes, can you hear me better now?
Yeah, I hear you great now.
Okay, great.
Michelle, is that okay with you?
I hear you.
Okay.
It's perfect. I hear you both very well now.
All right, great. So the other item that I just wanted to ask each of you about quickly is in case someone else comes into our room, besides the conversation being recorded and going to YouTube, if anyone else comes into the room, would you, I just don't want there to be any personal attacks against anyone. We want the conversations to be, both civil and organized. Is that okay with both of you?
Yes, perfect.
Definitely.
Okay, great. So let's get started regarding our conversation. We're here to talk about whether or not the territories of Gaza and the West Bank are considered disputed or occupied territories. And actually, just quickly before I do that, quickly, would you mind just giving everyone a quick background who's watching the conversation? Michelle, could you give a quick background of yourself to anyone who's watching right now? And Batzi, you can go next.
Yes.
Sure. My name is Michelle Cohen, and I was born in Israel, in Moshav Emunim, which was a farm just for immigrants from Egypt, which is where my parents were born. On my father's side, my paternal grandmother and grandfather were both born under Ottoman rule right here. My grandmother was born in Hebron. My grandfather was born in Syria, but he moved to Hebron, where he met my grandmother and where they married. And my grandmother told us that when they were newlyweds, they had a lot of trouble with the Arabs that lived in Hebron, who were harassing them because they were Jewish. So they left and they moved to Jerusalem. And then that wasn't very good for them either, so they moved to Alexandria, Egypt, where my father was born. in 1948, everybody returned. They lived here until 1966. And then my parents decided that they wanted to move to Montreal, Canada, which is where I grew up. And I was 8 years old when we moved. And then when I was an adult, I decided to move to the United States. All in all, between Canada and the United States, I lived in North America for 40 years. And in 2006, September, almost 40 years to the day, I decided to make Aliyah and return to Israel. And when I moved here, I started reading the news. It's very different when you actually live here than when you live abroad. So I kept reading all this wrong information and all this, especially when I live in the south, close to Gaza. And so from the very beginning that I was here in 2006 and 2007, there were rockets being launched, not so much into where I live, but in Zot. And I would never read anything about it in the news. And so I decided that I'm going to start posting what's really going on here. And then sometimes, especially in 2008, 2009, when we had a war with Gaza, and they were saying that Hamas is honoring ceasefires, and there were rockets flying. And I knew that this can't be true, that people can't be thinking that Hamas has honored a ceasefire when I'm personally experiencing rockets. And so I became very passionate about informing people about what's really going on. So I started seeing on Facebook, and then some people said, why don't you try? A friend of mine suggested I open my own blog, which I did. And I did that in 2010, and it's growing rapidly, and there's a Facebook group growing very rapidly, and people are getting more informed, and people are
all right,
informing us also, and it's that's what I've been doing here for ever since I came here.
Great. And Batzi, do you just want to quickly tell our viewers, a quick background of yourself?
Yeah, I don't think my family is as indigenous to the Middle East as much as yours is, Michelle. I'm really impressed, and I'm sure the conversation will touch upon your background as we move on. But just about myself, I was born in Israel to two parents who survived the Shoah, the Holocaust, and they came after the Holocaust to Israel from Eastern Europe. My connection to Jewish history is through my mother's side, who is, I'm a descendant of my mom, going back to 12th century Spain, so that's my pride and joy. But like you, Michelle, I left Israel, and I lived outside of Israel for 32 years, much more traveled, spent more time in different countries. I lived in America, lived in New Zealand, lived in the UK, in Australia, in Canada, and decided that the best place on earth for me would be in Israel. And I came back here 2.5 years ago. And like you, the need to explain to the world, not really to explain, there's no need to justify, but more to educate the world about the position that Israel is in, which they seem to be always very ignorant of. So here we are.
Right. So, we're here to talk about the disputed or occupied territories. Michelle, would you mind giving us your take on, what you consider both Gaza and the West Bank, either disputed or occupied territories, and why?
Well, they're definitely not occupied because we have legal right. And of course, I don't call it the West Bank because as far as I'm concerned, West Bank is nothing more than a geographical description like any other geographical description, with absolutely nothing to do with its name, which is Judea and Samaria, historically. And we have legal right to build there. And that this invention of it being occupied is something that was invented from the Arabs, that are Arab countries and the United Nations, but we have legal proof that we have every right to build there and that it's not occupied. And that's my point of view, and I do not accept this word occupied, and nor do I accept the name West Bank, which really means nothing. It's like East River or any other name, geographical description.
Great. Go ahead, Batzi.
Max, I was on your program 2 weeks ago, and I agree with you, Michelle. I feel like preaching to the converted here, Michelle, but that's okay. I hope some people are listening to us, and even if we help educate one person, I feel we have achieved a major goal here. I used to call that place the West Bank. As I said, like you, I said 2 weeks ago, I said West Bank of what? And I call it Judea and Samaria, the original name of this place. And I call the place that I live in, the place where the state of Israel is part of, I call it Eretz Israel. Some people prefer to call it Palestine, which was the arbitrary name given to this place. I call it Eretz Israel. And when you talk about legally, and this is something I really feel and need to stress, is the fact that we don't just feed the world propaganda. We base it on facts, on legal issues. Anybody who contests, anybody who disputes our right to those places, I will refer them to the San Remo Accord. Of course, there have been many UN resolutions dealing with occupied territories, disputed territories. I don't care. I talk about law because resolutions don't have as much power and cannot be enforced as much as a law can. In 1920, after the area Eretz Israel and other people called Palestine, was taken over by the British after the Turkish Empire, the Ottoman Empire, lost the First World War. And this area, of course, was no man's land. There was never a sovereign country here. There was never a government here. The place was always ruled by others after the Jews were exiled from this country in the year 70 AD. So the area, of course, was a no man's land. And just like any inheritance that is found and no one knows who it belongs to, there was an international court of law created by the Court Supreme Five, the US, Italy, England, France, and Japan. And they were deciding, we're going to decide who to give this inheritance to. And they asked all the parties to come forward, those who believed they had a claim to this land, and asked them to give their arguments. And of course, the Zionist organization under Weizmann came and gave their arguments. The Arab under King Faisal came and gave their arguments. In April 1920, a decision was made, which was anchored in the law, and the decision gave the Jews the right to all of Eretz Israel, also called Palestine, and both sides of the Jordan, Transjordan, and Judea and Samaria. The Arabs received Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria. Everybody was happy. And then, of course, one day, Abdallah, the king of Jordan, met over lunch with Churchill, and, he wanted some kind of a reward for helping the British defeat the Turks. And Churchill, just over lunch, gave him Transjordan, and it's not anchored in any law. It's not. There's never been a resolution giving Jordan Transjordan, and the Jordan actually illegally was created out of carving it out of the area that was given to the Jews as Eretz Israel. Right. And that's when we talked about the law. Go ahead, Max.
Yeah. So here's what I wanted to ask you. I saw just the other day. Obviously with the different people I'm speaking to, you see a lot of different postings on Facebook, and one of them was of a stat where they said in regards to the West Bank, in like 2012, there were it was some monthly figure where it was saying like there was, let's say, 60 some odd babies delivered inside of the West Bank, and then at the bottom of the stat it said because of Israeli checkpoints, of those 60 babies that were Palestinian babies that were delivered, 30 of them unfortunately passed away. And so for those people who would say that, these territories are occupied, such as the person who probably would have been here today in this discussion, what would be your response to that where, innocent, babies, let's say, are dying, if that fact is true, due to, let's say, restrictions amongst individuals trying to travel around those areas? Michelle?
Who is the question to?
Yeah, go ahead, Michelle. Michelle, you can address it, and then Batzi.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, a quick Google search will show you how many hospitals there are in Jenin, in Ramallah, in Nablus, which is Shechem, and this whole farce that they need to come into Israel in order to deliver is exactly that. It's a farce. They have hospitals, and if you see how beautiful hospitals are, I actually Googled and saw one hospital being totally renovated and looking better than some of the hospitals here in Israel. And so it's just a gimmick to try to get to the checkpoint and make a big drama out of it so the camera people can film and spread these rumors around the world that we are treating them inhumanely and so on. But actually they have hospitals, and there's absolutely no reason for them to come into Israel. And I always ask them the same question. If you feel Israel is your enemy, why would you want to go to an Israeli hospital? Why would you want an Israeli doctor to deliver your baby? You want your own country. You're always crying out, free Palestine. So you have your own hospital. Why do you need to cross the border? Why do you need to stand in a checkpoint to give birth? It's this is all done with one thing in mind, and that's to delegitimize Israel. That's the only reason they do this, and they're very successful at it. Our biggest problem is our PR is not very good because we don't think along those terms. We just go along and do things like the rest of the world does. We don't sound scheming and trying to find different ways for, to trickle into believing that things aren't exactly the way they are. There's absolutely no excuse for a pregnant woman to stand in line at a checkpoint when you have hospitals in 3 major cities in Judea and Samaria where all the Arabs live.
Right.
Go ahead, Batzi.
Just to add to that, Michelle, good points. Just to add to that is, I don't have the footage here with me, but I'll be happy to supply to anybody interested. There was this woman who was treated in a hospital in Beersheba from Gaza, and next thing she comes and she's her goal is to blow up the hospital. So please, if you come to blow up our pizzerias, if you come to blow up our innocent civilians, don't expect not to be in checkpoints. I said it and I'll say it again. When I go to America and I have to stand there spreading my arms under the X-ray machine, I feel violated. These people, and I come to America not for the purpose of blowing people. And I'm not saying everybody who's coming to Israel comes for the sole purpose of blowing innocent civilians. But those that are hurt in hot water are being very careful with cold water. And I don't blame the Israeli authorities, and I don't blame the security checks, all these things. If you people want us to start to trust you, don't ever come strapped with a bomb belt or, with an explosive belt or in any other form to try and hurt our people, because we will defend our people at any cost. And if it means putting your people in checkpoints, then I'm sorry, I have no sympathy. You really need to show us that we can trust you, and then everything will be okay.
Right. So,
exactly. Actually,
yeah, go ahead.
Actually, what Batzi is referring to is a woman named Wafa who got burned. She was looking for treatment. That's the one you're talking about, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
She came in for treatments, and the doctor took care of her. And when she was well, he asked her to come one more time in order to check and see how she's doing. And that one time, she came with a bomb strapped around her, underneath her coat. And when she came through the checkpoint, they discovered it. And her intention was to go into the hospital, in the waiting room, and to blow everyone up along with herself. And her mother says in an interview that the reason she did that is because her boyfriend was mistreating her, and then he left her, and she was angry, and then she decided to take it out on it in the hospital in Israel. Later, we find out that she's actually an active terrorist, and this whole story that her mother told was an absolute lie. That's the story.
Right. And so
yes, that's the one.
So what I'd like to ask each of you is one of our viewers who's who's listening in on the discussion right now, named Norman. Inside the text chat, he asks a question. Sinai has a very sparse population. Why not develop it for the benefit of the Palestinians by using it to connect Gaza and the West Bank? Michelle, do you have a particular opinion about that?
Nothing would make me happier than to give them a home. I just don't think it should be in Judea and Samaria. Gaza, Sinai belongs to Egypt. Egypt would have to agree to that. The problem isn't that they can't find a place. Let's say and
I want to back to that. I mean, Norman, are you asking to connect?
Oh, sorry.
Hello?
Yeah, I hear you, Batzi. I think just Michelle was cutting out a bit. Michelle, Michelle's cutting out a bit. Michelle, do you hear me?
Hello?
Yeah, I hear you, Batzi. Michelle, Michelle, do you hear me?
There are supposedly Palestinians, and they have some also in Egypt, also in Lebanon, of a Jewish state amidst what they really wanted to. Yes, develop the Sinai. They could develop Jordan fully. It has nothing to do, not wanting Israel to believe in a two-state solution, or supposedly less radical, saying, don't get...
Right. Michelle, can you just hold your microphone? Batzi, you still hear me, right?
All of Palestine, from the north, the border of Lebanon, all the way down to Eilat. They want the entire place, which they believe is theirs, as if it was their country at one time. And
right, Michelle, do you hear me?
History will verify that they never had a country. It was the entire.
Batzi, you there?
Yes, I am. I cannot hear Michelle. I hear her cut off. She's coming in.
Right, yeah,
breaks. She's breaking up.
She was breaking up, so 1 second. 1 second. So
while you are...
Yeah, do you want to address the question? She was breaking up, and I was going to ask her, I think she might have had to speak closer to the microphone, perhaps. But, no...
I was going to ask Norman.
Yeah.
I was going to ask Norman, does he suggest creating some kind of a corridor between the Sinai and Judea and Samaria? Is that what he's referring to? Norman, can you please answer my question?
Right, I'm sure he'll put a response down. And so, just to confirm what Michelle said, so Sinai is really a area located and controlled by Egypt. Is that correct, Batzi?
Yes, the Sinai currently is correct, is controlled by Egypt. It was part of the peace agreement that was signed between Israel and Egypt. And before the Six-Day War, Egypt also had control over Gaza. But wisely enough, they decided to forego that and said that they had no responsibility for it and left Israel with the problem. So I think we were hoping to take care of the problem in 2005 or 6 when we left Gaza, but evidently it's still an issue. So to go back to the question of creating a corridor, I hope that's not what what Norman was referring to, because that would really break Israel into half. And there was no way myself and others are going to agree to it. I'm just hoping, I'm waiting to see what Norman was talking about. Has he answered my question? Or
I don't see an answer yet. I don't see an answer yet, and perhaps he might respond, and I'll definitely keep a look at it. I just wanted to make sure. Oh, okay, now he did respond.
No, he's saying no. He said no. He did respond. He said no, not a corridor. So how do you suggest, Norman, we connect Judea and Samaria and the Sinai? If Egypt agrees to give the Palestinians a place in the Sinai, how will they run a government that is controlled by Hamas on the one side, and in Judea and Samaria, a government by the PLO? I'm just trying to understand how will the two states connect. And I see another comment by Gary S. saying it's interesting to see how many people actually think it is acceptable to collectively punish Palestinians, using examples from 2005, such as Wafa Samir Ibrahim al-Bliss, to justify such anti-human right. I have to say something, Gary. Part of this, hopefully, I don't know, maybe this conversation will evolve into the right, what the Palestinians want to call the right of return of whoever to what is proper Israel nowadays, because it has come up in the past, and I'm sure it will in the future. How do you suggest Israel will know who to let in? How many are out there that Israel should be concerned about? Where do you live, Gary? I mean, wouldn't you be concerned about the safety of your children, of your brothers, of your mother, your father? Come on, don't expect the Israelis to be the biggest of the world. I'm sorry. We have to care about ourselves, and we have to.
I'll send you Ramon's number. Just give him a call.
Our right. A country has a right to defend, not just a right, a duty to defend its people.
I'm gonna text it to you because I can't go to
We're
Facebook.
not punishing collectively. Okay. How do you distinguish between the ones that wear the explosive belts and the ones that are not? How do you distinguish between the wafas and the non-wafas of the Palestinian people? Would you take chances? I wouldn't.
Right. Michelle, do you want to go ahead and say something?
I'm just totally agreeing with Batzi on what she's saying here. You can't find out who they are until they're actually in, and it's too late. First of all, again, another farce is this whole right of return. Let's face it, there were only about 850,000 Arabs living here during the British Mandate. And today there are...
Sorry, Michelle. Michelle, before...
Yes.
Michelle, sorry. There were only half a million Arabs living here. There were 850,000 Jews countries. Let's keep those figures in perspective, okay?
Okay, you're right. Okay, so only 500,000 living here during the British Mandate. And so the youngest one has to be at least almost 65 years old. All the rest, my parents are Egyptian, but nobody considers me a refugee from Egypt. Why should I consider the children of those 500,000 to be from this area? They were born in countries. If they don't have citizenship in other countries, how is that my problem? I was given citizenship. I was born here, and I'm a citizen here, and I have my rights. If they were born in Lebanon or Jordan or Egypt, let them go to the consulate there and bother them for citizenship. It's not my problem. I don't have to deal with somebody who was born in another country and still consider them a refugee 3, 4, 5 generations later. That's utterly ridiculous. Only the Arabs who used to live here are still considered refugees of the second and third and fourth generation. No other people on the planet have ever been considered refugees except for the actual generation that was born in the country. So this entire thing is everything is a double standard when it comes to Israel. They make new rules and things that don't even make sense that are generally acceptable in this world. Like if a 65-year-old man who's been living in Jordan wants to come and live here, let's say to come and meet the rest of his family, why should I have his children and grandchildren come and live? It doesn't make any sense. They were born in another country, and they should have citizenship there, not here.
So can I come in here and just ask a quick question? Because I see Gary, put in a remark inside the text chat. Is that okay, ladies?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so Gary, Gary seems to be concerned with the idea of human rights, and so what I'm seeing here from his comments is, such as the example that I just brought up before about, let's say there's been, small children or babies that have passed away due to certain restrictions. I know you brought up that there, are hospitals obviously inside of Palestine. Why do you have to cross into Israel in order to go to them? My question to you would be, if these different checkpoints are inside of the West Bank and making it difficult to travel inside of the West Bank versus just crossing the border, and it's resulting in, babies dying, I mean, is that a human rights issue that Israel, the country of Israel, needs to address? Batzi, you could go ahead and...
May I answer?
Yeah, go ahead,
okay.
Batzi, and then Michelle, you'll go.
Thank you. Yes,
Okay.
there are human rights issues on both sides. Gary, do you care about human rights issues only on one side? Then I have nothing else to say to you. Why don't you care about the human rights issues of Israeli civilians? Do you know how many people died in the years of the Oslo Accord because we let people in, we trusted them, we gave them weapons, we let them in, we tried to help them, we tried to help them create an economy, infrastructure. Why don't you think about the Israeli human rights issue? I'm not saying the human rights issue is non-existent as far as women and children needing health care. But, why should Israel sacrifice its security? Because you consider the lives of Palestinians more important than the life of an Israeli person. I'm sorry, my charity begins at my home.
Let's clarify this. I consider all human rights to be equal, and human beings have to be treated equally.
Wait, Gary and Michelle. Michelle, do you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, Michelle, do you hear Gary? Gary, I know you just joined the room. Can you say something, Gary?
Yeah.
Just quickly, and I just want to test to make sure you're coming in fine.
I should be coming in fine. It needs to be made clear that human rights and the right of people to have liberty and life and things like this are for everybody. And so I treat the human rights of Israelis and Palestinians equally. And so to claim otherwise is disingenuous of you. And it is quite spurious of you to do that. And you're sitting there talking about people being died at checkpoints and things like that for the children, right? During the past, I don't know, let's see. As of June 2012, for example, there were 552 obstacles to Palestinian movement within the West Bank, or in Judea and Samaria. Okay, now these are including 61 permanent military checkpoints. If Palestinians living in Bethlehem want to get to a specialist hospital in Ramallah so that they can get treatment for something, they have to cross through at least 9 checkpoints in order to get to that hospital. If it's an emergency or something like that, you're talking about people needing medical treatment and things like this. And on top of that, Palestinian hospitals are incredibly undersupplied and undermanaged in comparison to hospitals in Israel. Israel is the occupying power. Under international law, it has obligations as the occupying power. These are all international law statutes which Israel has signed up to. You can't avoid these topics, and you can't sort of blame things. It's this back and forth, tit for tat, blaming and going, what happened in 2005? What happened in the Oslo Accord? Look how many people died. People have died. And to end a conflict, you have to go through a series of very specific conflict resolution issues, and that's a political topic.
Wait a minute, Gary. Gary, do you have any statistics as how many Palestinians died as a result of not being able to cross into Israel? Can you give us some figures? Because we have the figures of those innocent Israelis that were killed as a result of not being very careful on those checkpoints. Do you have any figures, Gary?
Between
How many Palestinians actually died? No. How many Palestinians actually died? How many died?
Between 2000 and 2005, 67 Palestinian mothers were forced to give birth at Israeli military checkpoints. 36 babies died. There's a statistic for you.
36 babies died. How many Israelis died as a result of the Oslo Accord and
so
people
just
blowing up
do that.
pizzerias? I'm sorry, I know a baby's life maybe in your eyes is more valuable than that of an adult human being. I'm terribly sorry. I don't. Do you know how many thousands of Israelis were injured? No, I'm not going to sit here and let you think that a Palestinian's life is worth a lot more than an Israeli life. Not fair.
You're treating the death of a baby as if it's equivalent to the death of somebody who's died in a suicide attack. They're not equivalent in the ways in which you're trying to make all death is wrong. You have to condemn all death, but you don't do anything to try and stop babies being killed at checkpoints. You sit there and spew right-wing propaganda. Right-wing propaganda from, I don't know, Lieberman, Netanyahu, or whoever you support.
Batzi and Gary. Gary.
I support Netanyahu. I support Netanyahu.
Right-wing propaganda. No, and you don't care. You don't care about the Israelis who've died. You just like to use them to try and justify harming Palestinians and Palestinian human rights.
Gary.
Oh, wow.
You don't care about the Israelis who've died because you're sitting.
That's a very harsh statement, Gary, and it's not a fair one. I just told you, I'm Israeli first. My charity begins at home. If I have to choose between supporting the lives of my Israeli...
Your country is occupying another people.
What's up?
Your country is occupying
let's talk about the occupation. You call it occupied. Let me ask you something. How did Israel end up in Judea and Samaria? Can you please let's run that scenario. What is in history? Hold on. Why don't you let me ask you? Let's clarify some terms so we both speak the same language. What brought about Israeli occupation, you call it, liberation, whichever they call it. What brought it about? Which event in history caused a reality on the ground that Israel ended up in Judea and Samaria?
The war in 1967.
Okay, good. Did Israel want this war? Did we ever want to liberate or to own Judea and Samaria? Did we ever want to unite Jerusalem? Between 1948 and 1967, we never made a single effort to try and occupy any Arab land. As a result of the 1967, which was imposed upon us by our Arab neighbors, a certain reality was created on the ground. Do you agree with that? Occupation, if it ever happened, was not because Israel wanted to end up occupying land. Let's face it.
And Gary,
let's take responsibility.
If Israel didn't want to occupy territory, then it would have kept to the borders in which it was given in the partition plan. But it hasn't kept to the borders it was given in the partition plan. It has went on to occupy territory. And
no. Israel was happy. Israel was happy with the partition plan. It's the Arab nations. Israel was happy. It's the Arab nations that were not happy. Actually, In the partition plan, oh, in the partition plan, Jerusalem would have
okay,
been.
you want to talk about history? Let's talk about history. We'll start before 1948. Before the war, 1948, over 250,000 Palestinians were thrown out of their homes before the war started in 1948. Over 250,000 Palestinians were made refugees by the Haganah and the Irgun before any war started.
Okay, Gary.
Go ahead, let Michelle go ahead answer.
Can you please answer how is that any different than Australia, New Zealand, the United States, Canada, Pakistan, Mali, Indonesia? How is that any different, please? Each
different conflict in the world has a different set of circumstances. You can't compare what happened in America to what's happening in the Middle East to what's happening in Australia. They all happened at different periods in time. At different times when there was not international law, when there is international law. We're talking about the modern period. We're talking about Israel, Palestine. We're not talking about Australia. We're not talking about Pakistan. We're not talking about America. We're talking about Israel, Palestine, and we're talking about since, and we're talking about the modern era. You know, we can talk about colonialism, and we can talk about the good and the bad parts of colonialism if you want. We can talk about my views and opinions on America. We can talk about my views and opinions on the colonization of Australia and the persecution of the indigenous people. You know, we can go into all of those conversations. We can even talk about Syria if you want, but it doesn't deal with the topic that we're trying to deal with now. The topic that we're trying to deal with now is looking at the terminology in terms of what international law and international consensus say about the occupied territories, and they're called occupied Palestinian territories by the international community, and that is accepted.
Really? In which law? Can you tell us which law refers to them as occupied Palestinian territories? I've just looked before this conversation, before this debate, I looked up some terminology. I would like to know which territories are you talking about. As show me one law, show me one international law that refers to these as occupied Palestinian territories. Please do. Enlighten us. I will not be able to find one.
The United Nations Security Council refers to them as occupied Palestinian territories.
That's not law. These are resolutions. The resolutions are not law. Excuse me.
Guys.
Resolutions are not law. They're not binding. I'm sorry, resolutions are not binding.
Batzi and Gary.
General Assembly resolutions and Security Council resolutions. There's a serious difference between the two, and I suggest you learn about the United Nations body before you try to claim that it's not binding. The Security Council resolutions are agreed between Security Council members.
Batzi and Gary.
On top of that,
Gary, I had to step in here quickly because I mean the discussion is exactly what we want here. You guys going back and forth. But I also want to include Michelle in here, and I also want to just share with you, like, can we each go and speak one at a time so that the video itself doesn't get corrupted, okay, Gary? Because I know you guys have been speaking over one another at times. Is that okay with you?
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Gary, do you hear me okay?
I hear you perfectly.
Okay, so finish your point, Gary, and then Batzi respond, and then Michelle, you know, you come in here and, you know, chime in as well. Okay, go ahead, Gary.
So, as I was saying, the United Nations Security Council and all of their documents refer to it as the occupied territories. In international consensus, the majority of the international community refer to it as occupied Palestinian territories. And if you want to look at the specifics and look at how it came about in terms of international law, the Geneva Convention clearly has the stipulations in Article 39, I think it is, or Article 38. You know, I'm not a lawyer, but I follow international consensus quite well. It refers to it as occupied Palestinian territories, trying to deny that there is an occupation. It doesn't do anything to bring forward a discussion on how to start real peace. And the real conversation that we should be having is talking about how to bring peace about in a genuine manner, instead of finger pointing, instead of saying they did this to us or we to them, or you know, any of those kinds of things. You want to talk about people being killed and things like that. You were talking before, we were talking about children dying and things. If you're not able to say that children killed at checkpoints is wrong, and without trying to qualify it by saying, but this and but that, and but how many people died here, how many people died there. People know that there are people who have tragically been killed in heinous crimes of terrorism and various other things, but the way in which you don't try to treat those things as equal. You don't equally condemn what's happening at checkpoints. And, I personally equally condemn all death and all violence, but you try to justify it, the way in which it seems in which your conversation comes across, you try to justify what's happening at these checkpoints by saying, but what about the deaths of Israelis?
Right, so Batzi, go ahead.
Exactly, because you started immediately telling me about the death at the checkpoints, and you didn't even make a reference to Israeli death until I brought it up. So what does it tell me? That, some people are more equal than others, and I'm not going to. Yes, I do regret the death of babies.
Yes.
But what you just started, Gary, let me finish. But you started by saying, do you know how many babies died at the... And I'm saying to you, yes, and do you know how many innocent civilians died as a result of the suicide bombing? Because you've just totally ignored it. Said, I realized that people died on both sides, but you just started. So I'm sorry, I have a right to defend my own. As I said, my charity begins at my home. I do regret the death of other innocent people, but if I have to secure the rights of my people to live in peace and security, that will be my top priority. And I'm not saying it should be at the expense of other people's death, but I do have my concern for my people. Now, you talked about the Security Council resolutions being law. You want to talk about law? I mentioned it. I don't know if you were here in the conversation, but I talked about law, and I'm talking about international law, not resolution, something that is still effective nowadays, and that is called the San Remo Accord, which is the decision of the San Remo meeting after World War I in 1920. Article 22 of the San Remo resolution considered Judea and Samaria as well as Transjordan. They can have Transjordan. All I'm saying is, you want to talk about international law, go see history. Don't give me resolutions which don't have as much enforceability, which are not as enforceable as law. Yes, they may have power. I didn't say that. There are lots of resolutions that were taken place. You say you want Israel to abide by UN resolutions. Okay, let's talk about UN resolutions, Security Council or General Assembly, whatever. In 1947, there was a UN resolution 181. Israel abided by it. Palestinians, Arabs did not abide by it. They didn't abide by it, yet you come to me and you say you don't abide by UN resolutions? I mean, look at something that preceded the 242 or the 338 or other Security Council resolutions. Look, there was even a resolution 194 that was dealing with the refugees, trying to resolve the issues of refugees on both sides. The world now thinks about, when they hear refugees of the Middle East, nobody even thinks about Jewish refugees from Arab countries. The 194, Resolution 194 from 1948 deals with all refugees in the Middle East. Guys, we had a chance to resolve it or to try and resolve it, but they refused the 194 resolution. Why? We didn't talk about a right of return. No, Israel doesn't have to give a right of return. We want to resolve the issue, but I'm not going to give up my sovereignty as a Jewish state, I didn't decide of the nature of this country. I didn't decide that this country is going to be a Jewish state. The concept of creating a Jewish state, a homeland for the Jewish people, was created by Gentiles. Balfour was a Gentile. He decided on creating a Jewish homeland. The UN resolution, a Jewish homeland. The UN is not a Jewish organization. San Remo Accord was not a Jewish resolution. The creation of a Jewish state is not created by the Jews. It was the Gentiles who determined the nature of this place.
Okay. San Remo is an accord which is heavily disputed because, well, first of all, it's part of the British mandate, and the British mandate was terminated, not continued, so it wasn't handed over to any other body. And so when you terminate treaties, they no longer apply. And so when you terminate those treaties, they no longer apply. Secondly, you want to talk about sort of refugees and the right of return and things like that, and Jewish states and Jewish homeland. I personally don't care about people's ethnicities. I treat people equally as human beings, regardless of whatever background they come from. However, when you're talking about refugee situations, there are three currently accepted in international discourse methods of resolving refugee problems, and only one of those is actually a right, and that's the right of return. And so refugees, regardless of what you think about them, have a right back to the place in which they were forced out from. If they so
find
choose.
Me the word, find me the word right. Please find me the word right in any of these resolutions. Please find me the word right. I would agree with you if you could find. I was looking for the word right. They talk about should be permitted, and they talk about, but they don't talk about right. It's only a recommendation. I'm serious. I was looking for the word right today. Please find me the word right in any of these resolutions.
Batzi and Gary, can we have Michelle? Did you want to come in here? I'm sorry you've kind of gotten in and out of the room. Do you want to share your thoughts on what each of these speakers have been saying? Michelle, do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Okay, go ahead, and your turn to speak.
Yes. I'm not hearing you very well, though. It's cutting up.
All right. Well, we hear you. I hear you just fine. Can you go ahead and share your opinion on what Batzi and Gary have been talking about?
Yeah, well, I honestly didn't hear because and the first part that Gary was speaking, I couldn't hear him at all. And then I went out and came back in, and then I was able to hear him. And then I went out and came back in, and I missed a lot of it. So I'm not really sure what was being said. I just know that it's all I ever hear is double standards. That's what I hear. I'm supposedly an Egyptian. My parents were born in Egypt. I don't think Egypt would ever allow me in. It's always the same thing. When it comes to Israel, all those resolutions, all the people who defend the Arab cause, it's always a double standard. And Israel is always expected to do things no other country is expected to do. And there is me that once again, it's if I wanted to go back to Egypt and live right now, there's no way I could get citizenship. Even if I told them, well, both my parents were born there.
Right.
I couldn't get citizenship because they didn't even have citizenship.
Right.
They were just legal.
Gary, can you address that point, Gary?
Were never even given citizenship. I didn't.
There's a complex discussion to be had around that debate, because, as I said, refugee situations have three ways in which you can resolve them. Right now, the right of return or return. Since there is a dispute about the word right, we'll use the word return. Okay, just okay. for the sake of it, since you won't accept that term. Relocation. So relocation of the refugees from where they're being refugees into a different area, or integration. Those are the three different kinds of solutions to refugee situations.
Compensation. Excuse me. You can also add compensation.
Compensation is a financial aspect of either integration or relocation. So compensation isn't a resolution in itself. Compensation is part of either integration or relocation. So compensation comes with those two resolutions to a refugee situation. I've studied refugee situations quite intently, not as intently as I possibly could have, but let's talk about sort of the way in which Jewish refugees from Arab countries and Palestinian refugees have been conflated against each other in a politicized manner. Now, Danny Ayalon does this and so does the Israeli Foreign Ministry, but only in the last 15 years or so. Now, Michelle, I have friends in Israel who are from Iraqi Jewish descent, from Yemeni Jewish descent, and I speak to them all the time about their positions and their feelings on things. And even I've got in Israel who are from Moroccan and Algerian descent, right? Now, Jewish refugees from Arab countries were forced from those countries at different stages throughout between 1950 and right the way up until 1992, 93. There were different exoduses. 1984 with Lebanon, 1982, 1952 Iraq. And so so the expulsion, first of all, the expulsion of Jewish refugees from Arab countries wasn't an immediate response or some kind of equivalent to Palestinian refugees. And so trying to make those two situations as if they are the equivalent to each other is incorrect, factually and historically.
Not true.
Okay?
Not true, because my parents left in 1949.
Not true.
And the reason they did that, my mother tells me, is because they came knocking at the doors of the buildings where Jewish people lived, and in each building there were very large double doors, and there was usually a doorman who was usually Arab himself, and they came to the building and asked him if there were Jewish people living in the building, because they wanted to go upstairs and pull them out. This was in 1948, and because he liked my parents and thought they were good people, he actually lied and said, no, in this building there are only Italians living. There are no Jews in here.
Each individual family has their own. Each individual family has their own narrative on certain.
Let me finish.
Each individual family has their.
Gary, let Michelle finish her point.
My grandmother, who lived in Egypt all her life, had never had any problems. But since around 1945, she noticed the difference of how the Muslims used to treat the Jews, and she came home one night, one afternoon, very upset. My father asked her, "You seem very upset. What's the matter?" She didn't want to talk about it, and then she finally told him, "I was harassed in the market, and my behind was singed." Just something that I've never experienced before in my life. And in other words, what was happening is they were showing Jewish people disrespect and making them feel uncomfortable and unwelcome until they had to leave. And when my parents left, they were allowed to take a suitcase with weighing only 20 kilos. Whatever they can put into their suitcase, 20 kilos is what they were allowed to leave with. And they had to leave all the rest behind. Now, if that's not a refugee, I don't know what is. So if I'm not allowed to go back to Egypt, and I'm second generation.
I wasn't saying that.
Let me finish my question. Why do you feel the youngest possible refugee, actual refugee, first generation, is 64 at least? Why do you feel that his children and his grandchildren who were born in Lebanon or Jordan or Egypt or anywhere else or Syria has the right to come here and ask for citizenship when he can't even get citizenship in an Arab country where Arab people live, where Muslims live? Why do you think that makes sense? How does this make sense to you?
Gary, go ahead, Gary.
The same reason why I think that refugees in Africa who have been forced from Ethiopia have the right to go back to Ethiopia no matter how many children they've had. Their families manage to go back to Ethiopians. And so refugees, if they're living in refugee camps, if they're registered with refugee agencies, it doesn't matter how many children or grandchildren they're having. If they're sitting as refugees, still registered as refugees, then they wish to have or exercise their right to return. And it's their choice. It's the refugees' choice on which of the three options to resolve their situation they choose. And Palestinian refugees still, for the most part, choose that wish to
born in
return to where they
Jaffa
were
or
thrown out.
Haifa, they should be able to just come back and live in Jaffa or Haifa or any other city in Israel.
And so should their descendants who be born in, and so should their descendants who be born in refugee camps.
Gary.
Being born in a refugee camp in absolute squalor. I know she had plenty of time. Now let me make some points, okay? Trying to claim that there is a double standard or something like this, it just doesn't work when you look at the facts of the situation. The fact of the situation is that there is no equivalence to be made, and it's actually morally duplicitous to try and group Jewish refugees' rights to try and counter the Palestinian refugee rights. It's not a countermeasure that you can use to try and negate the rights of Palestinian refugees. The same as it would absolutely be abhorrent for somebody to try and negate the rights.
If you want to single out Israel, then you wouldn't have the feeling that you need to do that. You see, I don't single out any country.
I don't single out any country. I work on criticisms of all kinds of countries which are abusing people's human rights. Now, no, you may laugh at that. You may laugh at that if you like, but I won't.
No, I'm laughing at the fact that you really are saying we cannot compare the Jewish refugee issue from Arab countries. I'm sitting at a home of a person who was born in Iraq. His father was one of the most prominent doctors in Iraq. They owned tons of lands. At some stage, 50% of the landowners in Iraq were Jews. They had lived with nothing.
Nobody's saying that
no, but that's just one example here and one example there. But when you talk about the Palestinian issue, you're talking about the lump sum of refugees. It's not fair. Don't tell me you're talking about refugees wherever they are. You are distinguishing between some refugees are more equal than other refugees. No, does it say any? Yes.
Batzi.
Go ahead.
Jewish refugees from Arab countries went to Israel, chose to integrate in Israel and accept Israeli citizenship, and they chose that solution for their situation, and they received Israeli citizenship. And they are living in Israel now as Israeli citizens with the full and equal rights of their fellow Jewish Israelis, right? And that's a fact that you can't dispute. Now, injustices which happen to Jewish refugees need resolving, and they need resolving seriously in a way which doesn't negate their rights, because their rights are there regardless of any other political situation. But to politicize Jewish refugees in an attempt to weaponize that particular point against Palestinian refugees is wrong. You can't try and force a thing by saying that Jewish refugees, because of the Jewish refugees, then we're not going to do anything about the Arab refugees because we don't have to, and things like that. There is responsibility to be had. What should happen is Jewish refugees who want to have justice from places like Iraq and things like that, they should be able to seek justice. And they should be able to sue the Iraqi government and get either compensation. If there are people in Israel right now who aren't happy with the solution to their refugee problem, they need to be able to take it up with the appropriate authorities in a reasonable manner. And if people want to go back to Iraq or go back to Lebanon and things like that, they should be able to do so and really feel safe doing so as well. And that's a serious approach to a refugee situation. And so, but at the same time, I'm happy to sit and say all of this. But what are you happy to sit and say about Palestinian refugees and their rights?
Let me ask you something. Where in the world, you seem to be very knowledgeable about resolutions, UN resolutions, Security Council resolutions, where anywhere in any of these resolutions does it talk about refugees and their descendants? Tell me where. Because Michelle could just declare herself, Michelle, you see, you were born on the wrong side of the divide. You should have been born Palestinian, and this way you would have the very honorable and very dignified title of being a refugee and live of UNRWA stipends and walking and have people like Gary defend you. You see, you were born on the wrong side of the Middle East conflict, Michelle. Let me ask you, where does it say that descendants of refugees are also considered refugees? Anywhere, show me one resolution if you're such an expert on resolutions.
the United Nations Relief and Works Agency defines Palestinian refugees as a person whose normal place of residence was Palestine between June 1946 and May 1948, who's lost both their homes and means of livelihood as a result of the 1948 Arab-Israeli conflict.
That was UNRWA. You talk about UNRWA? UNRWA? You talk about UNRWA, yes?
And I'm sure that you're going to say that's the best organization and things like this. But let's get back to...
No, I didn't say... No, I didn't say... You see?
Guys,
when did you enter... You seem to have entered the prediction business as well. No, I'm not saying it's a biased organization. I'm not saying... But my question is, why is there only... There are refugees all over the world, Gary. There are Rwanda refugees, there are Bangladeshi refugees, there are Kashmiris refugees. Why is the only group of refugees in the world having its own agency taking care of its financial issues? What's so special about that group of refugees? Why didn't the UN create a special organization? No, let's finish. Why didn't the UN create a special group, a special agency to handle for each group of refugees around the world? Don't they deserve? You see the refugees all over the... Yes, of course. Which ones? Go ahead.
There are agencies in Africa who look after the needs of refugees in Africa. There are refugees in Europe that look after European refugees of various different countries. You know,
give me an agency of the UN that was established for each group of refugees. There is one agency that treats all refugees. There is one agency that treats all refugees, and there is one agency that treats only Palestinian refugees.
Batzi and
Now,
Gary.
you tell me that why don't you tell me that Palestinians are more equal than others?
Batzi.
They're not more equal than others.
Gary.
That's the reality.
Yes, Max.
Gary, here's what I want to do. Since this topic has, gone back and forth between occupied territories and international law, what I want to do is I want to address a specific question that Scott posted inside the text chat. This will bring us back on subject regarding occupied territories and disputed territories, and it will kind of move the discussion into a solutions-oriented discussion. So, Gary, I'm going to read the question to you because it's aimed at you, and then let's move the conversation, into, what, how this should be handled, and, kind of, that will, I believe, go into solutions. Okay, Gary?
Mm.
Okay, so
yeah,
the question from Scott is: do you really believe, Gary, that a unilateral Israeli withdrawal from the West Bank is plausible in the short run, particularly given the shifting geopolitical situation in the region?
I think that the State of Israel needs to abide by international law and international resolutions which have called for it to withdraw from the occupied Palestinian territories. That's as simple as that. Now that needs to be qualified with a proper discussion about how and which this is carried out. It creates a sustainability on the ground, because unless there is sustainability on the ground, including security factors, then you're not going to progress any kind of real peace. But at the same time, you have to look at the reality on the ground that's happening right now and factor in all of those issues as well, because the reality on the ground right now is that you have military occupation, which is causing serious damage to the rights of people who are living there. And that the human rights of people need to be tackled first in order to allow for a sustainable peace, because if there are human rights abuses which are continuing, including human rights abuses against Israelis, and I believe that a recent Human Rights Watch report said quite categorically that terrorist attacks against Israeli civilians are human rights abuses and illegal under international law and various other things. You have to resolve all of those things in a sustainable manner in order to achieve a successful peaceful pullout of the occupied Palestinian territories.
Okay.
And you also can't forget, just wait a minute, because people like to talk about the West Bank and Gaza and things like that. You can't forget about the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights are still occupied. They still belong to Syria, and they are also occupied, and Israel needs to be able to deal with that situation as well.
Right, and so
What's
Batzi,
your idea of dealing with the situation?
right. My just quick question would be, Gary, like, how plausible do you actually believe, that sort of scenario is? Because I mean, I think it's let's address that if it's really
Well, it's very plausible. If Israel withdraws from the occupied Palestinian territories, gives them the territory which is according to the international law, then that's right. That's the way in which it goes. There's no reason to suspect that it's implausible for that to happen. And in fact, it's something which should happen.
Go ahead, Batzi.
Gary, a question of terminology. You call it occupied Palestinian territories. What makes it Palestinian? Just a question. What makes it Palestinian?
That's what the international consensus refers to it as. My British government refers it as occupied Palestinian territories. I go with what my British government says. And by the way, it's the same government that
government called it Eretz Israel. During the mandate, the same British government that you are quoting now is No, they also called it Eretz Israel. Last week or 2 weeks ago, when I was on this program, I shared with the readers, with viewers, with the listeners, that whenever I go and I lecture about the Middle East, I bought some coins from the British Mandate era, and I bought them, and they both say on the same coin it says Palestine, and in parentheses it says Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. So the British government, the same British government. Let me finish, Gary. I was very quiet when you spoke, which is very hard to do for me, But what I'm trying to say is, the same British government referred to Eretz Israel and Palestine. I prefer to call it Eretz Israel. You call it Palestine. I have no problem. What preference would? What?
I call Israel, and I call the occupied territories Palestine. I don't call the entire area.
I call the entire area. The whole entire area is called Eretz Israel and Palestine. There is a country called Palestine. There isn't Palestinian Authority, if you want to refer to as some kind of a government authority. But let's talk about occupied territories and UN resolutions. The UN resolution 242 and 338 talk about withdrawal from occupied territories. It doesn't talk about withdrawals from the occupied territories. You said that you're not a lawyer, neither am I. You said you've studied law.
From territories occupied in the recent conflict. You can read
the
resolution.
Exactly. Wait a minute. It says from occupied territories. As far as Israel is concerned, Israel left Sinai. Israel gave back Gaza. We have fulfilled that agreement. If you want to talk about, nobody ever defined what those victories were. Show me where the boundaries of those territories are addressed. And those UN resolutions are so vague. They're so unclear. They could be subject of interpretation to anybody.
Yeah, and it's fortunate for your political agenda that they are so vague. But here's what Resolution 242 reads as: withdrawal of Israel armed forces from territories occupied in the recent conflict, termination of all claims of state belligerency, and respect for acknowledgement of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of every state in the area, and their right to live in peace.
Okay, it talks about when you quote the 242, it talks withdrawal from territories occupied. It doesn't say the territory. I'm sorry. If you're the one who raised the issue of international law, so let's talk law. Let's talk law. You cannot refer to international law. You cannot refer to international law when it's convenient for you. and then decide, oh, wait a minute, it's against my agenda, so I'm not going to talk about legal issues. Language, terminology,
Batzi and Gary.
words are very crucial when it comes to law. I don't need to tell you or the listeners that one word could change the whole meaning of a resolution. It says withdrawal from territories. It doesn't say from their territories, and it doesn't give the boundaries of whichever way you look at it, Gary.
West Bank, the Gaza Strip.
Batzi and Gary. Batzi and Gary.
You want to exclude the West Bank from being classified as occupied. And I understand why you want to do that, but in reality you can't, because both are the territories occupied. That's what the UN resolution is referring to.
Batzi and Gary.
How about if we refer to it as disputed? Would you accept that term? If you want to sit at the table and talk, then I'm sorry, we have nothing to sit at the table and talk about, because the whole issue of having this conversation is how do we move forward. If you insist that it is occupied, and I say it is because it is disputed, I'm not excluding. Gary, disputed.
Do you dispute that your military is in the middle of the West Bank right now? Are you trying to claim that
Gary, disputed could also mean occupied. I'm at least
it doesn't mean occupied.
Some leeway. Yes, disputed could mean occupied.
Guys.
You refuse to give us a chance to talk. You have already given us the death sentence before you even sat and listened to what we have to say. Disputed could be very, whichever way you look at it. Disputed could imply occupied. I'm at least willing to sit at the table and wait a minute.
You just gave a whole spiel about terminology and its appropriate use and how terminology can change things. Exactly why you want to use the term disputed instead of occupied, because it is disputed. It is disputed. The international community says so. My government says so. International law says so. The Fourth Geneva Convention says so. And the United Nations.
You want to talk about governments? I mean, I'm not going to point a blaming finger. I lived in the UK. Your government is the one who cooked the whole issue, but that's not the point right now. Your government has a very major, so by you projecting at us, if you think that by projecting at us you're going to relieve some of the guilt that your government bears for the whole issue, I have news for you. So let's move forward. I'm saying let's call it disputed for the sake of at least getting to the table and starting some kind of a negotiation. But if you decided that I deserve the electric chair before we even sit at the table, we're not going to get we're not getting any.
Proper terminology, things get so angry and upset. You know, she probably supports the settlements. She probably supports what Eli Yishai says. You know,
Gary.
How much do you charge for palm reading? That's exactly what you're doing. You have reduced yourself, I'm sorry, to a really low level, trying to tell me what my political conviction is. I'm sorry. I'm trying to talk to you. Let's move forward. And let's agree on some terminology that's going to be acceptable to both sides. If you want to call it occupied, fine. I'm saying I'm not. Wait a minute, let me finish, Gary. I'm saying if we want to move forward, you refer to it as occupied. I say for the sake of starting a negotiation, for the sake of starting some kind of a moving forward process, let's refer to them just for the initial stages, if you want, as disputed territories, and then we'll move from that. But you have already cut me off. You're not even willing to listen to my side. You said, no, you're an occupier. You are a killer. You're
I didn't call you an occupier. I didn't call you an occupier. I did not call you an occupier.
You called me.
Guys,
Israel an occupier.
Gary,
you called me as an Israeli occupier.
Your government is occupied. Your government and your military are occupied.
My government is the government that I voted for, and if you blame Israel for anything, you're blaming me as well, Gary.
Batzi and Gary. Batzi and Gary. Batzi and Gary. Batzi and Gary.
Because she's not prepared to have a proper conversation. I'm sitting here perfectly calm, talking about the proper terminology, which everybody else knows except her, which is Sam Batzi wants to use.
Gary.
You know, even the Israeli High Court refers to it as occupied territories.
Gary, Michelle, you've been waiting here very patiently, and I know you've had some technical difficulties. Michelle, do you hear me?
Yes.
Could you turn off click the turn off camera button? Okay, Michelle, could you come in here and provide some balance, if you can, to what each of these people have said?
I can barely hear. I just hear.
She's frozen.
Yeah. Michelle, can you click the turn off camera button, Michelle?
But I can't.
She's cutting. She's cutting in and out.
She probably also can't hear us.
Yeah. I don't think she can.
Hear anybody properly, and I've missed 3.
Okay.
Sometimes, but it's just not being. I don't know why. I can sometimes hear.
All right. So Michelle, what we'll do is
I just heard you say she can't hear.
Yeah, Michelle, can we? If you click the turn off camera button, that might help. But if not, then we'll have to fix your technical problems for next time. So I mean, I guess what I'd let Michelle. Do you hear me better now? Michelle, do you hear me better now?
Yeah, I do a little bit.
Okay, just speak directly into your microphone, and that should help. With the sound coming in properly.
Okay.
I hear Gary and Batzi. Do you hear Michelle now?
Yes, I can.
I just heard you, Batzi, also. But can you tell me what we were discussing, because I really missed quite a bit of it. Something about calling Judea and Samaria occupied, and the Golan Heights occupied, and Gaza occupied.
Michelle, we're basically, I'll just give you a kind of a summary. Gary and I were trying, Max, justifiably so, wanted us to refocus on the issue of disputed or occupied territories. And I said to Gary, if you want us to sit at the table, can we agree on some kind of a terminology without really judging, or some kind of a terminology that would be a starting point to move forward? And I said, I would like to go with disputed territories, which for me would also imply possibly to satisfy Gary and many others, international and non-international organizations, as occupied territories, because disputed could also imply occupied territories, which would satisfy Gary but would not satisfy me, because I can bring forth argument which would prove that it's not occupied territory.
Right.
So I thought, let's agree on the term disputed. And Gary refused to. Gary said I had my political agenda, and I would not sit at the table with somebody that has already signed my death sentence before they're willing to sit and negotiate with me.
Right.
So, if you could contribute to this. Gary, please. Go ahead, please, Michelle. It's your turn, and I'm sorry we have not allowed you to enter so far.
You gave your side of things, so I'm now going to give mine. Do you want to accept international law, and do you want to accept that the international community consensus refers to it as occupied territories? I did not sign any deaths. I am not sitting here refusing to negotiate or discuss, but, we're not in the Israeli government. We're not in a position to negotiate on these issues in terms of the way in which you're trying to put reports. We are here to have a discussion and debate about whether or not to accept term disputed or occupied. You're trying to forcefully push the term disputed onto everybody else, and you're refusing to give even an inch on that.
Gary,
because your entire argument rests on it being referred to as disputed territories rather than occupied. And that's the reality of it.
Michelle, can you come in?
But I gave you this.
Guys,
go ahead, Michelle.
Go ahead, Michelle.
I think occupied is not the reality of it, because if it was, it would have been fixed a long time ago by the United Nations. I think that's just an antagonistic name. I don't think it has anything to do with reality. There are laws, and we've proved once again with the Levy report that we actually have the right to build in Judea and Samaria. We have the right to build everywhere, and this whole territory business is something that's so repeated that it's actually become true, when in fact it's false. And actually, I don't really care what the United Nations say. I honestly don't. And I don't really care what anybody else says.
Michelle,
this is our country, and we're going to do what we want in this country, and that's as simple as that.
What's the reason, Michelle, why you don't? Michelle, why don't you, really care about what the United Nations says? Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, because I think the United Nations is biased, and it very often has no grounds, and I think that's why, they use this word, but we have laws that prove, once again, that we have right to build in Judea and Samaria, and that's why nobody does anything about it except talk and sanction and accuse, but nobody's ever done anything. No army has ever come in here and stopped us from doing anything that we are doing or building or anything like that, because I believe that, deep down inside, that it's simply not true. And it's just being repeated over and over again with no basis.
So
that's what I think.
The unwillingness for the international community to intervene here is very frustrating, but at the same time, at least I'm thankful that no military intervention or anything's happening, because that would mean more people are being killed and more people are losing their lives and being displaced and things like that. You don't want to have another violent conflict in addition to the one that's already ongoing. Now, but you talk about bias and why you don't trust the United Nations and things like that. Okay, that's fine. You don't have to trust the United Nations, but we need to talk about bias when a panel appointed by Netanyahu, by the Netanyahu government, concludes that there is no occupation. The Levy reports. That's what we're talking about here. The panel was appointed by Netanyahu, and they concluded that there is no occupation. And it just proves that the public discourse and debate has clearly reached a delusional moment, because the situation, you're not following any kind of proper discourse. The panel was formed by Benjamin Netanyahu. The position isn't new. The Israeli Supreme Court, has tried for various reasons to retract the statements that it's made in the past in regards to occupied territories. And the fact of the matter is that trying to suggest that the Levy report somehow usurps or supersedes the Fourth Geneva Convention, which Israel signed in 1952 or 1951, it's completely ludicrous. There is an occupation. The Israeli military are there occupying on the ground, and the Palestinians are having their freedoms on a daily basis taken away from them. That is an occupation. The occupation, a belligerent military occupation of territory which doesn't belong to the state of Israel.
Right. Michelle, go ahead.
Why it's there? Do you have any idea why the military is there?
I know of various reasons why the military is there, and various reasons why you would claim it's there for security, for various other different things. But the reality of the matter is that amongst all the checkpoints and things like that, the vast majority of them do not separate Israel from the Palestinian territories. They separate Palestinians from Palestinians. and ensure that a settler settlement continues to expand and things like this. So the military presence doesn't actually create a secure situation. It doesn't bring about security having the military there at all.
I don't think separating Arabs from Arabs is a form of security, so that they don't transfer weaponry and so that they don't create plans in two towns where they can actually carry out a terrorist attack?
Well, if they wanted to carry out a terrorist attack, there's 1.2 million Arabs inside Israel. There's about 6,000 to 7,000 Arabs. Since you like calling them Arabs, you won't use the Palestinian, I noticed. There's about 6,000 to 7,000 Palestinian Arabs that cross the barrier each day without going through a checkpoint. 6,000 to 7,000. They go and work in Israel to do their jobs and things like that. 6,000 to 7,000, between 6,000 and 7,000. They cross the barrier every day.
I thought you said Israel is limiting their movement. They're coming to work here. Terrible Israel. We are allowing them here actually to earn money.
Actually, Israel tries to restrict their movements, but the desperate people manage to find ways. And there's a family friend of mine who's currently sitting in an Israeli jail just because he works at a falafel shop in East Jerusalem. There's another friend of mine who is in a prison right now because he tried to work in repairing a hotel in Jerusalem.
Oh, do you know? I know many Mexicans who crossed the border. I lived in Houston, Texas, and Mexicans were shipped outside of America. So is that okay for America to do it, to ship away people who are illegally in their country, and it's not okay for Israel to do that?
Considering that America doesn't occupy Mexico and it's a completely different situation, your comparison
is completely California was not. What do you think meaning of Texas is? Let's go back to American. You're the one who brought. You said America is not occupying. Texas is actually a Mexican word.
Batzi and Gary.
Texas is actually an American word. California is
that matter.
But
let me finish. You rely on vague comparisons. You rely on vague comparisons which compare completely different situations, completely different circumstances.
But you said America doesn't occupy Mexico. I'm giving you an example. Yes, America did. Texas, the state that I lived in, was actually Mexican. It was actually Mexican. So Mexicans should have a right to come and work in Texas, free, without any problem. But I don't hear you complaining about that. Israel is singled out.
They should not singled out. Not singled out at all.
Yes, Michelle said, Israel is singled out. There are 3 yardsticks countries are being measured. There's a yardstick for democracies, there's a yardstick for tyrannies, and there's a yardstick for Israel. And that's exactly what's happening in this conversation. And Gary, you are far better off with me. You are far better off with me, who was at least willing to give you some leeway for your insisting upon the occupation, the occupied territory. People like Michelle, smart people like Michelle, are sitting there and saying, the heck, we're not going to even negotiate the term occupied. You should sit with people like me who are even willing to give you the benefit of the doubt by calling it disputed territories.
I'd rather sit with people from the Meretz party and from Dan and things like that, because at least
I never doubted that. But in this debate among right-wing Israelis, you should probably sit with people who are saying, hey, Gary, let's at least agree on terminology. And let's start from something very broad, and let's never. But no, you're not even willing.
Terminology is occupied territories. That's what the international.
It's not. You haven't even seen that through.
Batzi and Gary.
You're not willing to sit. Your own government gave us, along with other people, along with other countries, international. All of a sudden, the international community doesn't matter. But when it comes to issues that support your point of view, the international community matters a lot. Gary, come on.
The international community matters always, which is why I always go with a consensus.
Right.
The international community gave us the land of Israel gave us the whole area of Palestine for a Jewish homeland. Are you accepting that as an international community decision?
The British mandate doesn't represent the international community.
It's an international. Oh, it was the Supreme Council of the Five.
Batzi and
British mandate was terminated.
It wasn't the British government. It was America. It was America. It was France. It was Italy. It was Japan, and it was Britain. The Supreme Council of the Five. I'm sorry, it was not single-handedly decided by the British. Let's not talk about that, because you need to go and study history.
Because you keep on bringing up history and things like that. You don't care about the reality on the ground right now. You don't care about the.
What about these resolutions? These resolutions are also part of history. Excuse me, Gary. The resolutions that you quote are history. What is history? Something that happened yesterday is already history.
The resolutions that are valid in international law right now. The resolutions that you quote were terminated with the British mandate in 1948 and are no longer valid.
In international law, the law is law is law is law. I have news for you. It's law.
Guys.
Max, wait 1 minute. The law that you're quoting was terminated. The mandate was terminated. The San Remo Conference was not internationally binding.
It was not? No, the UN resolutions are internationally binding. You're right. How could I fail that?
Because faithful councils. And the British mandate was terminated. The British mandate was not handed over to anybody. The mandate wasn't given to anyone. It specifically uses the word terminate in all of the documentation that's there. And so all of the agreements previous to that moment are null and void. And then we have 1948, the United Nations, the resolutions from the United Nations, the Fourth Geneva Convention, the Hague Commission.
The UN. Okay, you talk about UN resolutions. UN Resolution 181. Why didn't the Arab countries abide by that? It's a UN resolution, United Nations General Assembly Resolution 181. Why don't you go back to those you represent and reprove them for refusing to have accepted it then?
Batzi.
I really wish they had, but at the same time, it doesn't involve the refugee situation that was created before Resolution 181 was even put to the table. On top of that, the Palestinian Arabs were not consulted in any of the writings or draftings of the Resolution 181. The Palestinian Arabs were not included in any of the discussions about this.
And the Jews were included. Hey, wait a minute. The Jews were consulted. You think the Jews would have given up Jerusalem if they had been consulted?
The Israelis were consulted at various points.
There were no Israelis then. Excuse me. There were no Israelis then. There were Jews. There were no Israelis at that time. If that was the resolution created the state of Israel, then nobody consulted the Israelis because they were not existed then. They were non-existent.
Batzi, Gary.
Yes, there were no country Palestine then.
Batzi and Gary.
There was a country called Palestine. There wasn't a state.
There was no country. There was never a country called Palestine, never a sovereign country, never a country with a government. It was an area just like Eretz Israel was. An area. You want to take an area and create
this terminology. You're very welcome.
You're the one who talk about. Wait a minute. You talk about resolutions.
You want to deny the very existence of Palestine. That's almost exactly the same as people who deny the existence of Israel. It's despicable and disgusting to deny the existence
I'm not denying it. I walk around and I showed the coins that say it was called both things. It was called Palestine. You're not listening to me, are you? You're so stuck in your argument. When I lecture about the history of the Middle East, Gary, when I lecture about the history of the Middle East, I talk about a place called Eretz Israel and called Palestine at the same time. As far as you're concerned, there's only a Palestine. I'm sorry. There are both names. One original, Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, and one Palestine, an arbitrary name given by the Romans in the year 135 AD. I'm sorry. There are two names to this place.
And Gary.
As far as you're concerned, there is only one place.
No, there is the state of Israel, which was created in 1948.
No. There is a land of Israel, and a same area that land of Israel is also an area called Palestine.
country called Palestine, which existed
Never.
regardless of whether,
Excuse me.
But
or not.
What were her borders? Excuse me. What were the borders?
Between the Jordanian River and the borders of Palestine.
And who was the president of that country? Excuse me. Who was the president or the prime minister of that country?
Who was the president of Israel before it was created? You know,
No, it was not. I'm not saying the land of Israel was a sovereign state. You're claiming that Palestine was a sovereign state, and I'm saying neither was a sovereign state. Neither Palestine nor the land of Israel was a sovereign state.
It was a country. There's a big difference between creating a sovereign state and a country.
Area, not a excuse me, not a
Batzi and
country,
Gary.
an area.
Batzi and Gary. Batzi and Gary.
Area.
Batzi,
You're a child. Stop behaving like a child.
Batzi and Gary.
You yourself up there in your terminology. You tried to claim that I said there was a sovereign state. I never said there was a sovereign state. There's a difference between a sovereign state, what constitutes a sovereign state, and what constitutes a country. The people who were living in Palestine in the 1800s called their country Palestine. The people who were living in
okay, so if you call that place a country, you call the land of Israel a country as well, because it's one and the same, okay?
Because there you're talking about the land, you're talking about land, I'm talking about the country.
The land of Israel is the same area as Palestine, excuse me. I mean, go with history. Your own British historian, who happens to be a very dear friend of mine. Your own British historian, excuse me, Gary, your own British historian, Sir Martin Gilbert, read what he has to say.
And Gary and Batzi.
He's not.
He's Martin Gilbert's book, and you know, I've also read other books which say completely different things, because there's political bias in various different things. And so you go with the international consensus, and you go with various different narratives, and you find the truth. And
Gary and Batzi. You guys, I mean, you know, there's been a lot of talking back and forth, and so, I mean, I'm hoping the video will turn out fine. I'm sure it will be okay. But
what's called circular rhetoric, because you can't get through what's called circular rhetoric. There's back and forth.
Right. So
without any willingness to accept that there's an occupation, without any willingness to accept that Israel has to abide by international law, just like every other country.
Gary.
Same standard.
And just like the Palestinians, just like your Palestinians, they also have to abide by international law.
International law as well. And that's the difference. I don't go, what about this, or just like this tit for tat. I say that Palestinians and Israelis, and they both have to abide by international law.
Gary.
And you know what? Max, wait a second. Let's make a comparison here. Iraq, in 2003, accusations were made against Iraq. 2 UN resolutions were put against Iraq, and then Iraq was invaded. 2 resolutions. In comparison,
Gary, can we have Michelle come in here, please?
In comparison, Israel has a list with members more honored of UN resolutions against it, yet no action has been taken. Now, that's a real double standard.
Gary.
The inaction of the international community to hold Israel accountable. Justice and accountability are paramount.
Gary.
If there's no justice and accountability, then there's nothing.
Gary.
Justice and accountability has to count for something.
Gary, I know you want to get all your points across, but it's just, I mean, if there's no order, no one's going to be able to understand what anyone's saying. So that's why I keep trying to chime in here. And so I'd appreciate if, like, you just hear me out quickly and say, like, we need everyone to be speaking individually. Otherwise, no one's going to be able to understand what is being said here. So, Michelle, I want you to come in and, you know, give your points, because I heard you trying to speak under Gary. And, you know, Michelle, you can come in here and now say what you'd like. And I mean, guys, what I would just say is we're coming up on, you know, almost 2 hours that we've been speaking. So can we talk about solutions and how Israel and Palestine move forward with solutions? But Michelle, go ahead and you know, say what you'd like to say, please.
My solution is Jordan, Palestine. Period. Create a Jordanian Palestinian state, and anybody who will go live there is welcome. I don't believe in transfers or anything like that, but whenever they start whining that they don't have their own country, I would say, excuse me, you have a country. It's in Jordan. It's called Palestine. Anybody who wants to go live there can go live there, because Jordan was just as much Palestine as Israel. There is no difference. During the Ottoman and British mandate, please let me talk. I don't mean interrupted. I listened for a very long time. I need to talk now. First of all, there is no difference between Jordan and Israel at the time when it was all considered Palestine. So, and actually, Jordan was supposed to be Israel, but I am willing to forego that. And they can have it. They can have the entire Jordan and call it Palestine. And when they come and tell me, free Palestine, I go, well, Palestine is over there. If you want to live in your country, go live over there. That's what I think. And there is no reason why we are being pressured to create a Palestinian state within tiny little Israel. There is absolutely no reason why Jordan shouldn't be Palestine, because that's what it was in the first place. I want to ask you something, Gary. Do you have a problem with the idea of Jewish people building homes in Judea and Samaria, which you call the West Bank, which is simply a geographic description? Do you have a problem with that?
I don't have a problem with Jewish people building homes anywhere. The problem is when the state of Israel uses that as a justification to annex that land, taking it away from a future Palestinian state. And so the politicization and the fact that it's Israeli citizens in occupied territory, which is prohibited by international law, that's where the problem is. It's not a problem about ethnicity. And, you know, the thing that you just said there about Jordan and being Palestine and you know, making a home there, you know, that exact sentence right there is exactly the same kind of sentence as various different racist groups use in all kinds of countries across the world. Go and live in this country because that's where you belong. Go and live in that country because that's... Let me finish. I'll let you finish. Go and live... You know, I could turn around to an Israeli who immigrated from America and say, America is your country, not Israel. But that would be bigoted of me. You cannot do that and say that. You cannot send people back to a place just because it's convenient for your ideological agenda. You force people who are living in Bethlehem right now to move to Jordan, or you can't just walk up to them and say, if you want to have a state, go to Jordan. Because that's not right. Because that doesn't follow international law, it doesn't follow human rights discourse, and it certainly doesn't follow any kind of moral principles that exist in the world today. Trying to say that, you know, if you want a country, go somewhere else for it is incredibly shocking to make. And it's the same equivalent as if you were to say to somebody who is African American in America, if somebody who's in America and they don't feel like America represents them, and someone else says, well, go back to your own country. That's exactly the same kind of ideology as that stems from, and it's incredibly
shocking and difficult for you to understand is because you probably never had to leave anywhere and go live somewhere else. You see, as Jews, we're very resilient. We had to leave Europe. We had to leave many countries. We had to leave all our Arab countries, and we had to move else. And we did it with dignity, without whining and bitching, and just going into the new country and being the best of it. And not all of them moved to Israel either. There are many people from Arab countries who moved to Europe, who moved to the United States or Canada. You don't hear them whining. You don't hear them asking to come back. Iraq or to Egypt or to Morocco or any of these other countries. You see, for me, that's not a big deal. My stuff can move to another place in a jiffy, and you wouldn't hear it. I wouldn't utter a sound. You see, the problem here is it's got nothing to do with land. It's got to do with the idea that the Arabs who live here can't stand the idea of having a Jewish state amidst all their Arab countries, and that's where the real problem lies. Because if you give Judea and Samaria, very shortly after, they're going to also want Haifa, and they're going to want Akko, and they're going to want Jaffa, and they're going to want every other city, because that's their ultimate goal. You probably don't listen to their video, but I do. I listen to people like Mahmoud Abbas, who is supposedly one of the least radical of all, telling his people, you know, getting a Palestinian state is just a start to the ultimate goal of freeing all of Palestine. So you're talking like you're discussing this with people who will be happy with a small piece of land and they'll stay quiet forever. But I know better than that, and so do many others, because we don't have any soldiers in Gaza anymore, and all we've experienced since then, we've left Gaza, we destroyed Gush Katif, and what we got in response are of rockets. So don't come and tell me that giving them land is going to make them sit quietly forever and everything's going to be hunky-dory and we're never going to have any problems again, because that's just a delusional fantasy that will never exist. That's why I'm saying it's better for them to live amongst themselves. They don't like to be with Jewish people, and we don't particularly like being with them either. So they can go live in a place where they're all together, they're all Muslim, they all understand each other, there isn't a single Jew in Jordan, and they won't have any more problems. And I didn't say that they should leave and go live somewhere else, because we have 20% of our citizens are Muslim right here in Israel, and nobody's asked them to leave. What I'm saying is you have a country called Palestine. You want to go live there, fine. You don't want to go live there, don't complain. That's all. That's what I'm saying.
Gary,
I told you from the very beginning, I don't believe in a transfer. I didn't say transfer. I didn't say that.
Right.
Yes, you can create a country. You can create a country somewhere where that person didn't come from for them. That's what happened in Pakistan just a year before. There were Sikhs and Hindus living in Pakistan. They all packed up and went to live in the Punjab. You hear them whining until today, oh, we want to go back to Pakistan? No. They've made a life for themselves elsewhere. And that's where the problem lies, that none of you want to understand. All you're looking at is international laws and human rights violations and all this stuff, but you're not looking at the core, at the source of the problem, is that no matter what you give them and no matter what you do for them, they're not going to be happy. The only thing that's going to make them happy is to free, according to them, all of Palestine, which is actually all of Israel. That is their long-term goal, and that is their dream.
All right.
That's what free Palestine means. It's just the equivalent of Israel. That's all it is.
Go ahead, Gary.
It's very disappointing that you believe that. You know, I see these videos that you talk about, and I'm disgusted by them just as much as anybody, any correct thinking person is disgusted by them. And you know, but the reality is that I've spent a lot of time talking to real Israelis, real Palestinians on the ground in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, Nazareth, Bethlehem, Ramallah, and various other places. And the majority of people on the ground want to live together, want to coexist. All they would ask for is that the abuses, the human rights abuses, the inequality, the discrimination, and all of the various other things that are affecting their lives stop. And that involves Israel ending its military occupation of the occupied territories. And that's a reality, and that's what the international consensus is. And, you know, but very, very soon, right, and this is the big problem, okay, because there's a lot of people in Israel still, I think it's about 54% support the two-state solution, and about 61% of Palestinians still support the two-state solution. But very, very soon, unless something drastic happens to bring about a real, genuine push for peace, the two-state solution will be dead. Israel will still be occupying and controlling these territories with Palestinians and Israelis in them. And you'll have a situation where there is mass discrimination against one section of the population, because that's the reality at the moment. Israel discriminates against Palestinians in the West Bank, keeping them under Israeli military law, whilst Israelis who live a couple of hundred meters away are under Israeli civilian law. Now, using two different sets of legal system on people who are living in the same area is incredibly discriminatory. I wouldn't accept it here in the part of the world that I currently live in, and I would ask that people elsewhere wouldn't accept it either, because that's a basic discrimination. There's no other way to describe it.
Gary, so what do you? I mean,
discriminating.
Go ahead,
Can
Michelle.
I answer that?
Yeah. Go ahead, Michelle.
I think it's discriminating. I think it's extremely discriminating when I hear the Arabs say that Palestine, no Jew will be allowed to live in Palestine, and the whole world is very comfortable with that, not realize how anti-Semitic that sounds. People just don't want it. Let me finish, please.
Yeah.
I have heard them say repeatedly, no Jews will be allowed to live in Palestine. It's okay for us to have 20% Muslims living in our country, but no Jew will be allowed in the future state of Palestine. And people are perfectly comfortable with that. And if there's an Israeli community being built in what might be one day Palestine, that's not acceptable. In other words, Palestine has to be Jew-free, and this is okay with everybody.
No,
Palestine
doesn't have to be Jew-free, and that particular quote, that particular quote that you video, a poorly translated video on the internet, good. And furthermore, if there are people who are saying these things to you in person and things like that, then they're wrong. They shouldn't be saying those kinds of things, and certainly not what the majority of Palestinians think. Because the majority of Palestinians,
I don't care what
everyday Palestinians that you go and talk to. Let me finish, because you keep on, and here's another troubling thing. You keep on categorizing it. Israel has 20% Muslim population, but actually it has a 22% Palestinian Arab population living within Israel. Those people are of the people who were lucky and didn't be forced out of their homes when Israel forcibly took over the land in 1948. And those people are 4% Christian, and there's even some Armenians in there. And so your categorization of people is also even horrendously off. You're categorizing them as Muslims versus Jews and Jews versus Muslims. You're turning it into a very ethnicity-based kind of conflict.
Yes, I learned that from them, actually. I learned that from
Gary,
them.
excuse me. Gary, excuse me. Michelle, can I just refer to something? I don't refer to them as Muslims. We call them Israeli Arabs. And if you don't think that's the case, I've never been to Israel, excuse me, because I work with them. My friend here, he's a Turk, he works with them in the hospital. They're heads of departments. They're heads of the legal system. One of the judges in the Israeli court system has even been instrumental in impeaching the last president. So, they're called Israeli Arabs. They have rights. It still doesn't deal with the issue, Gary. They are not, but just to clarify that point, they're not called Muslims, they're not Christians, they're called Israeli Arabs. And there are no Palestinians living in Israel. Everybody who is in Israel has an Israeli ID card, an Israeli passport, and they're Israelis. They are not Palestinians.
They're Palestinian citizens of Israel.
Very
Palestinian citizens of Israel, that's what they are. That's what
they're Palestinian what? I'm sorry, excuse me, can you say what again? They're Palestinian what?
Palestinian citizens of Israel, and that's how they choose to identify.
No, they're Israelis. No, they're Israelis. Does it say in the...
That is how... No, because...
Then let's go and live in a country called Palestine when it's created. I don't want somebody who calls themselves a Palestinian living in Israel. I'm sorry.
Why don't you want them to define themselves the way that they want to define themselves? Does it affect
they want to define themselves, Gary, because excuse me, if somebody lives in America and they call themselves, I'm a New Zealand, I'm not an American, and they carry an American passport and they carry an American ID card and they still call themselves a New Zealander when they live in America. They may be born in New Zealand, but when they live in America and they take American citizenship responsibilities, they become Americans. If these people want to be called Palestinians,
let's discuss this because we're going to get into a very interesting conversation now about the difference between national identity and citizenship. Because the reality of the matter is that Israel has about 14,000 Armenian citizens. They call themselves Armenian citizens of Israel. We have Palestinians, the majority of Palestinians. Some of them, they call themselves Israeli Arabs. And that's because that's how they choose to identify.
Israeli Armenians. I live in this country. I work with these people. They call themselves Israeli Armenians. They call themselves Israeli Arabs.
Let me finish. I lived there for 2 years, and I lived also in the Armenian convent in Jerusalem with the Armenian community. And I lived there. They call themselves Armenian citizens of Israel. You cannot talk for them. You are not an Armenian citizen. You are not an Armenian. You also cannot talk for the Arabs. You also cannot talk force your definition of what a Palestinian citizen of Israel is. If somebody wants to call themselves a Palestinian citizen of Israel, it's their right because they're defining themselves. You do not define other people for them. And that's a basic concept. Because you do not define people. Let me finish. Because the reality is that an Israeli national, right? An Israeli national is defined as a Jewish Israeli, according to the Israeli Interior Ministry. You can go on the website right now and look at the way in which they call the demographics. A Jewish Israeli national, Arab national Israeli citizen.
Gary, excuse me. Gary, excuse me. That
Israeli government.
Okay, can I ask?
No, wait,
Gary.
Let me finish.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
And you can
go ahead.
And you can go and you can say that there was an Arab on high court and things like that. There has been one Arab on the high court. And if we look at the recent election discourse, right, the Israeli Election Committee tried to ban Arab political parties from being able to have their election videos up. And we can get into a long debate about it, but the fact of the matter is that Lieberman's party and Beit Yehudi and various other Jewish groups have incredibly racist election videos and things like that. But the Israeli Election Committee didn't try to ban those. The Israeli Election Committee did ban Hanan Zarbi, did try to ban the video from Meretz, did videos and various other election material from Arab parties, because the state of Israel discriminates against its Arabs. And you can have a token Arab, on the High Court if you want, but the reality of the matter is that there are human rights reports, there are statistical reports from Haifa University, various other things, and there's a narrative on the ground which proves that the state of Israel discriminates against its Arab population.
Gary, please let me respond to you, if I may, please. What you just said, you contradicted. But please don't interrupt me. I was very patient. Okay, if I did interrupt you, I apologize. But let me ask you something. You just contradicted yourself. You said there are Armenian citizens of Israel. There are Palestinian. They decide to define themselves as Palestinian citizens of Israel. You said so, correct? And you just said before that Israel does not give them rights. Israel limits their rights. They're very lucky that there are Arabs born in Israel, because if I, as a Jew, an Iranian Jew, wanted to consider myself an Israeli citizen of Iranian, where would I end up? Can you please remind me, where would I end up if I were to consider myself an Israeli citizen of Iran? That's one thing. The other thing that I wanted to address is one of the official languages of Israel is Arabic. I don't remember Hebrew being one of the official languages of Arab countries when Jews lived there. I'm sorry, okay? I mean, I can give you numerous examples. Okay, you talk about Israelis banning Arab parties from going to the elections. Excuse me, have you ever heard of Rabbi Kahana? Do you remember that he was banned from the Israeli? How can you say that Israel is only discriminating against Arabs? They banned a whole party from bringing the Israeli parliament because of the views that he had, whether they're right or wrong is a different issue. But they banned him because they thought it was inappropriate. So how could you say we're only doing it against Arabs? And if you say that there is only one judge in the Israeli Supreme Court, maybe because it's proportional to the Arab population of Israel. They're, after all, a minority. They are not a majority. Do you want it to be more than the proportion to the Israeli population? I don't think so. Everything has to be, I mean, it's like you saying to me, there is only one Hispanic man in the Senate. Of course, because the Hispanic population in America is not as much as the Anglo-Saxon, as much as the Caucasian, or even the black population. It's only normal.
Yeah, but notice, first of all, you never pointed out where I contradicted myself, because I didn't contradict myself. Second of all, I noticed how you rely on various arbitrary comparisons. You won't actually focus in on talking about Israel. You have to bring up Iran. You have to bring up what's happening in America. You have to bring up all of the various other different things, right? You're not able to sit and discuss coherently about
Gary,
the state of Israel, because you rely on comparisons to other places.
Because that's how the world works. The world works on really equal, using the same yardstick for everybody. Why does Israel? Michelle started earlier. Gary, Michelle started earlier by saying, excuse me, Max, can you limit a person to 5 minutes of talking? And I think Gary has already surpassed that. Gary is talking and talking and talking. Michelle said earlier that Israel is singled out, and that's exactly what you just did, is proof to that, Gary. Israel is being singled out because you don't look across the board. You use one yardstick for Israel, and I'm trying to say use the same yardstick that is being used anywhere else in the world. And I said, yes.
Different situations with completely different circumstances.
Well, I'm comparing Jews under Arab rule, and you're comparing Arab under Jewish rule. What's wrong with it, Gary?
We're comparing Israel. We're looking at Israel and the Palestinians. We're not looking at any other country in the world. We're looking at Israel and the Palestinians, and we're looking
Israel as a Jewish country and the Palestinians as an Arab nation. Okay? Do you accept that?
Gary. You're always looking just at the Israelis and the Palestinians, quote unquote.
Oh, okay. So because the Arab countries, are not democratic, we should let them get away with murder. Isn't that what you're telling me?
Guys.
Israel should be a democracy for all of its citizens, not just for one of its ethnicities. And that's the way democracy works. So you're saying
that because the Arab countries are not democratic, we should let them get away with it. Is that what you're saying?
No, I am saying that, again, look, you're comparing it to other countries. You're relying on comparisons which are completely vague and arbitrary.
Why not?
I'm talking about the state of Israel. Israel wants to be a democracy, right? In a democracy, everybody should have equal rights. But in the state of Israel, Arabs do not have equal rights to the majority.
Michelle, do you think that Gary?
Can you give an example of how they don't have equal rights?
Well,
what's not equal?
For example, the discrimination against Arabs in Israel, if we look at, I don't know, the disproportionate allocation of municipal funds, or maybe if we look at what's happening in Nazareth right now, and say that the mayor of Nazareth Elite will not allow an Arab school to open in his Jewish town, despite the fact that there are Arabs living in Nazareth Elite. Perhaps we could talk about Haifa and the fact that statistically Arabs are graduating with higher grades than Israeli Jews, but Arabs are not getting the same job opportunities, not getting the same rights. There are various different things, and in fact there's been entire books, entire human rights reports done about discrimination against Palestinian Arabs within Israel.
You think and that's the reality. I know you don't like this very much, because you like to focus on Israel all the time. Do you think there are discriminations in other countries in the world, like even in the United States?
Certainly, and
Michelle, he's not going to agree to that because you focus.
I agree that there is discrimination against minorities in various countries around the world, but we're not talking
about
other
the
countries around the world. We're talking about Israel and Palestine.
They're discriminated against. You think they're okay? So why is it that you only like to focus on Israel and Palestine?
Because we're here talking about Israel and Palestine. Let's stop right now. Okay, let's forget about Israel and Palestine for a moment. We'll remove it from our minds. We'll talk about Iran. Okay, shall we talk about Iran? Let's talk about Iran. The education system in Iran. Did you know that in Iran, their government, their fascist government, discriminates against people of the Baha'i faith? And the exact wording of the Iranian government statute is to call a situation whereby Baha'is are no longer acceptable within the community, and we cause their utter destruction. That's in not exact quote, but more, I can Google it if you want, but that's in the Iranian government's statutes. And I actively campaign on that issue. And I've actively campaigned on that issue for over 3.5 years. Because the Iranian government is a fascist dictatorship that is persecuting minorities within its country. And, there's another one. There's another one. There's in the state of Qatar, in the Gulf countries. We can look at migrant workers and the way migrant workers are treated there, and the discrimination that they face, or the discrimination that non-Arabs face in various different countries. We can go to America and we can look at the discrimination against ethnic minorities there. We can go to Australia and look at the situation there. And all of those things are things which need to come down. We can look at which one is in Uganda. Uganda right now in their discrimination against the LGBT community. Or even in Britain, in my own country, the discrimination against immigrants and migrants and various people from different countries. Did you know that my government right now is trying to deport around 210 Syrian students back to Syria? And I'm absolutely appalled by that, and I'm actively campaigning on that issue. So, we can talk with various countries around the world if you want. And Iran is my favorite because I have so much criticism of the Iranian government. And so we can talk about other countries.
Gary, may I ask you a question? If you're so concerned about the rights of the Palestinians, have you even tried to address any criticism towards its governments for stealing money from their people? Even the Palestinians know that. It's not a secret. The government...
I've written and published at least 3 separate articles on the matter. I've campaigned on the matter. I've publicly criticized the Palestinian government, and I've also told people who claim to support the Palestinians that they shouldn't support the Palestinian government because it's not the Palestinian government that deserves the solidarity. It's the human beings who are suffering under the various different issues. Right? And so, yes, I have much criticism for the current. You can't call it a government. It's not. They don't have a legitimate democratic mandate. They're not. It's not a democracy. They're out of their term.
They were elected democratically, by the way. They were elected democratically. Just to remind you,
a democratically elected doesn't kill its political opposition. A democratically elected government doesn't kill its own.
But you and I know that. You and I know that, Gary. Why don't you start correcting?
We can go through the election statistics if you want, and I can take you through every single seat which should have gone to the other party, and then I can talk to you about how this whole they were democratically elected and so they support terrorism thing. It doesn't work. It's propaganda. It's since 2006, and we're now in 2012. That's 6 years. 2013 we're in now. Sorry.
Okay, Gary, now that we at least agree on the issue of where one of the problem is, this is something that I would ask you as a citizen of the world, somebody who really cares about the Palestinians, try and fix the problem first of all from within, because no matter how much Israel is going to change, even if Israel, let's say you call it the occupied territories, you call it the government, you call it whatever you would call it, the problem is not going to be solved. Israel can leave the territories if you say we should leave, but the Palestinian government is, or regime or ruling, whatever you would call them, is still going to be corrupt. So how are you going to help the Palestinian if you're not going to solve that problem? Okay, Israel left. Let's say Israel left. The government is still going to be corrupt. You need to address that issue before Israel. Let me finish. Gary, just a second. Gary, just a second, please. All I'm saying is, okay, what happens the day after Israel, let's say Israel does leave those lands, can you give me a scenario of what will happen the day after Israel left if you haven't addressed the corruption among the Palestinian government or Palestinian ruling class or the Palestinian ruling, whatever, 3-4 people that run that place?
Let's be honest with you. It's a very legitimate question. And it requires a very complex answer because the level of corruption is quite high. It requires a motivation among the grassroots in the Palestinian territories to properly decide themselves and to remove the people who are corrupt from their positions.
Gary, why don't we start working together on that? This is something that you and I can work together on. Let's sit at the table and talk about that. That was a starting point.
Certainly we can talk about it, but it doesn't resolve all the underlying issues of the human rights.
No, but I think that should be the first issue to address, Gary. Gary, it's a priority. It is a priority.
Gary.
We disagree.
Gary.
But wait, in which case we disagree? In a second. In which case we disagree about where we should start. Because I believe that justice and accountability, human rights for people has to come first, and to resolve that and to resolve the situation, you have to be occupation.
But Gary, don't you think
human rights from the government of the Palestinians is also an issue of human rights? The Palestinians treat their own people awfully.
Certainly they do, and that needs to be resolved.
They're both corrupt, and they treat them. We have a serious issue of corruption and human rights deprivation. So there you have two issues. With Israel, you only say we have the issue of human rights. With the Palestinians, we have two issues. Why don't we start addressing two issues and then deal with the other issue?
I don't think we can claim that Israel as a government is completely incorrupt. You know as well as I do this.
Oh yes, I never said it wasn't. You never heard me say that, did you?
No, but I'm just saying. No, I wasn't saying that. But let's deal with the points that you raised. Okay, the reality that the bigger picture is the solving of the Israel-Palestine conflict. Internal Palestinian affairs need to be taken seriously, and they need to be addressed sustainably.
Okay, Gary.
That's for Palestinians with the help of the international community to resolve, which is also why, if you just wait a second, for example, in Britain, there are various political groups in Britain trying to establish links with grassroots Palestinian movements to support them in bringing about a genuine democratic future for Palestinians. Max, please.
Okay, guys, what I wanted to say is I'm going to be leaving the conversation shortly. I know, Michelle, you wanted to chime in with a point. The recording will continue going, but I wanted to thank each of you, for your time and trying the best you could to not speak over one another, although we could be more successful next time. But Michelle, and just because some of the viewers would like to see the conversation stay as on point as possible to the, to the said title and topic of the room, after you say your point, Michelle, if you guys could stick to that, to that topic of disputed versus occupied territories, which you obviously covered, but continue to stick to it would be appreciated, and I will speak to each of you shortly. And Gary, you can friend request me on Facebook. I'm going to put my name inside the text chat so I can. All right. And, yeah, Batzi, did you want to say something quickly?
Gary, let me just ask you something. Yeah, just one last question, Gary. I mean, we need to make sure that the day after Israel leaves, are the Palestinians really ready to govern themselves?
Yes, that's something that needs to be addressed. I've said, but you've just hit something on the head there. Okay, are you now saying that you would agree that Israel should leave?
I didn't say I agreed. I said, suppose Israel decides after we sit at the table, and if we both agree that we're starting with disputed territories, and you convince me Syria. I'm not giving you an example comparing, but I mean, a country that is not run properly, all the bloodshed. Are you ready to take it upon your conscience, upon yourself, the responsibility of more bloodshed within the Palestinian state that you are so motive of creating?
I don't believe that there would be bloodshed if Israel was to leave. Alright?
Oh, okay.
Because
okay,
the mistake that you're making, and I mean this very sincerely, is that you're treating Arabs as an entirely homogenous group, as if all Arabs, as if it was the same thing that happened in Syria. And I
just gave the example of Syria.
Just following your examples. Okay, but wait, just following your examples. You're suggesting that it's possible that what happened in Syria could happen if Israel was to draw from Palestine. And you're making the case and the argument to say that Israel staying there could possibly mean that more Palestinian lives are saved. And that's the line which you're going down. And I understand the line which you're going down.
Yes.
And I understand. True, yeah. You see, this is the thing, because I've debated with many people who work with the Stand With Israel groups. And I've debated with many people who work with the groups that you work with. And the reality is that all of the alternative, what about this and what about that solution that we could sit and talk about progressively, aren't going to come about unless we deal with the core issue of Israel's occupation. And you keep going back to it and say that if you convince you it's not disputed terrorists, I could waste hours and hours, and indeed I've been on here a few hours now. I'm going to have to go to sleep very soon. But I could spend hours and hours trying to convince you, or convince everybody else or anybody else, that there's an occupation going on. The reality is that people should go and see for themselves and witness the military.
I was there. I was there. But
no,
let me ask you something.
And I'm not saying this to you.
No. Gary, just to try, please, I'm just asking you to set the record straight about what's said, as far as it's not there to watch that there is no bloodshed among the Palestinians. Let's not misunderstand it. That's not the reason Israel is there. Israel is there to make sure that there is no blood spilled among its Israeli citizens. And I promise you, the moment Israel leaves and it becomes a banana republic, which is likely to happen, not because they're Arabs. Again, I'm not saying it's because they're Arabs. I'm just saying a country cannot be created overnight. A country needs to be run by people who are trained to run it. So far, those that run it are the most corrupt people in the world. Okay.
But you do realize that I forget when exactly. I think it was in 2011. The reports which were coming out from various governments, various independent bodies, said that the Palestinians were ready for statehood, and that they were ready to run their own country. And those reports exist.
If you think they're ready, then that's fine. If you think they're ready, then that's fine.
But they will never be ready. But they will never be ready whilst Israel is still controlling every aspect of their lives.
Well, and they're going to be ready with the leadership that they have right now. That's what you're telling me.
They need a change of leadership, but in terms of the structure.
Let me ask you something. If Israel is so responsible, why didn't they have a country between 1948 and 1967 when Israel was not there? If they were so ready, why weren't they ready then?
Because the ruler of Jordan wanted to claim that territory, because the ruler of Jordan wanted to create what's called pan-Arab nationalism between Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. And they wanted to have control of
everybody is bad. The Jordanians are bad. The Israelis are bad. The only ones who are still good.
No, the Palestinians are bad as well, in various cases. Okay, but it doesn't. You can't just take down to the simplistic, the simplified version of things that you are. You need to take a real hard look, because peace takes a great deal of work. And it takes a lot of compromise and a lot of painful sacrifices. It takes going through truth and justice and accountability commissions and various other things, and people need to be held accountable for various crimes, including Palestinian terrorists and including Palestinian terrorist groups. And they all need to be held accountable. But you're never going to be able to get there unless there are honest brokers for peace. And at the present time, Israel is not honestly seeking peace, and neither are the Hamas in Gaza, actually. It just to balance things out, because I know that you like a balanced conversation sometimes. But the reality of the matter is that we keep going back and hitting the same problem.
I know.
Okay,
I agree. I agree with you. But I wanted to hear you say, because the way this conversation started with you is that you blamed Israel and only Israel, and it's Israeli occupation that causes them to do this, and it causes them to be backwards, and it causes them that, and it causes them that.
I never said that it causes them to do this and that.
No, you said it stops them from doing, and it causes them from stopping to do this, and it causes them from being whatever. You blamed Israel and only Israel. At least I'm glad we were able to let me finish. At least I'm glad we were able to extract out of you some kind of an admission that it's not only Israel, because I think
it's not. But you have to understand that this. But from where a lot of people are looking, including myself, this is not something where it's a balanced conflict. Israel is the occupier. Palestinians are occupied. And that's the reality. Just let me before you come back with something, okay? Let me just give you an example, because I'm flying a friend to visit me sometime soon from Israel, okay? Now, to bring an Israeli friend of mine here, it costs me about £450 for the flights and for everything, okay? Now, if I wanted to bring my Palestinian friend who lives in Bethlehem here, I would have to pay about £1,600. They need to get special permission to travel. They need to pay for the permits. They need to pay extra money for the visas. They need to get permission from the Israeli government to travel from Bethlehem to Jerusalem to the British consulate, then from the British consulate back to Bethlehem. Then they have to get permits to travel from Bethlehem to...
I'm sorry, Gary. Whose fault is it? Whose fault is it? Excuse me.
The Israeli government, who is imposing those horrible, horrifying restrictions on that innocent people.
Why, Gary?
It's a form of correct punishment.
Gary, why? Can you distinguish between an innocent person and a terrorist? I'm not saying, but how do you have a way to profile them? Can you say this one is a great person, this one is a bad person? When you look at human beings.
No, I don't have a way to.
Take all the precautionary measures.
Okay, I personally do not have a way to profile people. It's not what I do. But at the same time, okay, you do not collectively punish an entire group of people with all of these restrictions and things like that just because of a security issue.
We're being
wait. In my country, if they did that, there would be mass protests on the streets, because you cannot discriminate against entire groups of people like that. You cannot do it. It's not moral. It's not ethical. It's against basic human rights. You cannot do that. You can't, and that's not including all of the things that take away the right to protest, taking away the right to have a truly free voice, and all of the rest of it the Israeli government does do to the Palestinians. And these are all issues, right, and that need to be resolved. And they're issues that need to be resolved as soon as possible. Yeah, go
ahead, Michelle. Michelle is trying to say something. I'm sorry, Michelle.
No problem. First of all, this is all due to past experiences that Israel has had with terrorist attacks. So we cannot be expected not to do that, actually. I would be very angry if they did, because I wouldn't feel safe personally after seeing all the terrorist attacks that took place in the last 10 years. I don't want anybody from Judea and Samaria to come freely into Israel without all these restrictions. And since there is actually, it would be discriminatory not to do that, because my life is at stake and I don't want that. And there is no reason for us not to do it. I know it's uncomfortable, but there it is. If they wouldn't have carried out terrorist attacks, then they wouldn't have to suffer this. And you can't just single out a few, say, oh, let's check this one, but let's not that one. My nephew is Jewish. He comes from Miami to visit here. They keep him at the airport an hour and a half every single time. So this thing that it's only the Arabs who go through this discrimination, so to speak, is not true at all. He's every time he comes into this country, he's held for an hour and a half at the airport, and I have to wait for him to be interrogated because he comes from Miami, because it's a drug center in the world, and they just keep asking him a million questions before they finally release him. So to say that it's only the Arabs is not true. And I wanted to bring up a point that you were talking about. You were saying to me it's not true that a lot of the Arabs who live in Judea and Samaria are ready for a state. They're ready for a two-state solution. But your average Joe isn't the one who makes the decisions. Their governments make the decisions. So I can go and speak to a lady who lives in Jenin who tell me, oh no, all I want is peace and quiet and everything will be okay. Just get your soldiers out of here. But she doesn't decide. She doesn't make the decisions. The governments make the decisions. And those are the people to deal with. And those are the people I heard saying things like, we're going to start with a small area and then we're going to slowly work our way to free all of Palestine. It's not somebody who is not. It's people responsible for the entire community who say this, not your average people who. And you were saying also that you don't have any problems with Jewish people building in Judea and Samaria, but like I said before, the ones who, if it ever be a Palestinian state in that area, they want it to be Jew-free. And you can tell me all you want that they don't, but they actually do. And anybody who thinks this is acceptable is, as far as I'm concerned, anti-Semitic.
Okay, well, you've mentioned a few things now, right? Let's talk about the last part first. Okay? The context under which I have no problem with people building houses. Anybody can go and build a house wherever they should be able to, if they own the property, if they own the land, and if it's legal for them to do so. Okay? So we have to understand context here. The Israeli citizens who are building in the West, what you call Judea and Samaria, are doing so against international law, and that's agreed upon by 99% of the international community. It's written in various international statutes, and that doesn't necessarily deal with the point in which you're making in terms of what the people are saying and things like that. But the reality is that nobody in the Palestinian Authority, at least, has ever said the words "we want a Jew-free West Bank." That is a misquote from a recorded video, which is taken completely out of somewhere that I don't really know. Okay,
Mahmoud Abbas said that. Mahmoud Abbas himself said it.
No, Mahmoud Abbas said he didn't want any Israeli soldiers in.
No, he said he didn't want any Jews.
No, he said he didn't want any Israeli soldiers. Let me deal with the points and let me respond, okay?
I'm asking you a question, and that will help you to answer your point. I want to listen. You're saying that as far as they're concerned, they would happily have Jews living in Palestine, in the country called Palestine. Even though Jordan doesn't, Lebanon doesn't, Syria doesn't, Egypt doesn't, but Palestine will.
Again, you're treating all Arabs as a homogenous group, and that's wrong. Okay, I actually happen to know a very good friend of mine who is Jewish and who lived and worked in Saudi Arabia for a number of years. And so, there are various. Let me finish, okay? There are various complexities to discuss, that treating Palestinians or all Arabs as a homogeneous group is incorrect and inaccurate. Okay, now I don't believe that there's such a thing as this quote as the Jew-free. Mahmoud Abbas said he didn't want Israelis or Israeli soldiers living in Palestine, occupying its future Palestinian state. Now, I'm happy to apologize if I'm completely wrong on that point, but let's move on.
Jews. I just found it on the internet. I just found it on the internet. Abbas said no Jews in Palestine state. Come on, a Palestinian state. I'm telling you, I see it black on white, so you cannot ignore that. Sorry.
From which right-wing source was that? The Jerusalem Post, or maybe Al Hayom, or one of the other right-wing.
If it's Israel, it can't be true. Is that it, Gary? If it's an Israeli source, then it can't be true. It's a lie. Is that?
If you can find it in Aretz, then I'm happy to believe it, because Aretz is an Israeli source. It's a Jewish Israeli source actually, but it tells the truth once in a while. Because
if it's in the Jerusalem Post, then it's a lie, and we just decided to.
If it's in one of the newspapers which is aligned with the right wing in Israel that have a particular agenda, then it's almost worthless to me.
And that's not discriminatory, right, Gary? You're not being discriminate right now.
No, I'm choosing
You're being
I'm choosing to be very careful with which sources I use, because I believe in the truth and accuracy.
Okay, so
it's not about being discriminatory.
That everything that the Arabs write is accurate, and everything
I don't.
The Jews
in Israel, correct?
Sheva writes is inaccurate. Is that what you're saying?
Well, Arut Sheva has been proven to be inaccurate on various occasions. For example, most recently in one of the reports that they had to take down, they lied completely about the two documentaries which are up for Oscar nominations. Arut Sheva.
The Arabs lie.
Haaretz is proven to be very accurate. The Israeli newspaper Haaretz. In fact, the majority of my information that I get comes from Jewish Israeli sources. They're just not biased, the right-wing Jewish Israeli sources. They are moderate, truthful, and accurate sources. They're accurate. They're accurate sources that report on actual facts rather than biased opinions. But let's move on to deal with your points. Okay, you talked about sort of security and things like that as well. Okay, and let's talk about security. We'll talk about the bus bombing in Tel Aviv in November. The person who committed that bus bombing didn't come from the occupied territories. They came from inside Israel, and that was a documented fact, acknowledged by the Israeli police. Okay, and so clearly the security measures